tulienda tukapiga kura vizuri, tukamaliza shughuli kitu saa 12 ndio sawa najitayarisha tutangaze mshindi, ndio kulitokea vurugu.
I was gang raped by 3 men in uniform.
Akanichapa makofi huko hivi, akanichapa na ilikuwa kitu kama kambao. Walikuwa wanaume 5, wote wakanifanyia kitendo ya unyama.
Nilikuwa nasikia aibu sana ati niseme nimeenda hospitali, nikisema ati nimerepiwa. Sasa vile nilifanyia kitu, hata sikuwa najua kitu yote, ati mtu anaweza enda angalia status zake ama angalia kama kuna ugonjwa mwingine wameniambukiza.
Yani sikuwa naona kama niko worth it. Ilikuwa ina discussiwa in households, so mtoto wangu ilibidi nimchange shule kwa sababu ulikuwa unasikia ule mama yake alinajisiwa, mtoto alikuja akaniuliza mama ulifanywa, so ilinipe stress, a lot of stress. Hiyo period nika develop high blood pressure.
Ni kwa machungu by the way kuona mwanamke mwenzako akinajiziwa na ananajiziwa na saidi ya mtu mmoja ama watu wawili.
No one chooses to be violated.
It is the abuser that has a problem.
When we have violence, sexual violence against children, defilement and sodomy and so forth, it just shows how low a society has sunk.
Sexual violence is a special kind of torture. It is the worst kind of torture. It's one thing to be tortured and break your leg. But when you're totally violated sexually, most times in a gang situation, you destroy the very psyche and the very soul of a person. When you damage the sanctity, the bodily integrity of an individual through rape, and other sexual offenses, when you damage the very soul of a person.
In 2017, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, KNCHR, documented the aftermath effects of election on human rights, specifically the incidences of sexual violence during the 2017 electioneering period in a report dubbed Silhouettes of Brutality. KNCHR observed that the highest number of cases were reported during the high-intensity moments of civil unrest which characterized the month that Kenya held its 2017 general election.
Electioneering period is particularly a period that we focus on because it seems to portend sexual violence. In the 2017 elections, the Commission documented 201 cases of sexual violence within the electioneering period. Of these, 96% the victims were female and the rest, 4%, were male.
These incidences are a stark reminder of the vulnerability of women and children during the electioneering period when political divides and competition results in protests and other acts of violence.
Sexual violence was actually being employed as a weapon of conflict in this disputed election. And it was a turning point for the Commission because we needed to immediately change our strategies so that we could be able to effectively and in a very timely manner amplify the voices of the survivors, to accurately document the trends and the patterns, and secure the necessary evidence that would enable the Commission to pursue accountability as well as legislative policy and practice reforms.
After engaging with the survivors, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights went on further and made various recommendations and had identified gaps. With the support of other organizations, a gap analysis was conducted within our Kenyan system to examine what could be the gaps that persisting and enabling election-related sexual violence to continue occurring. Some of the gaps that had been identified included the need for coordination between the actors that are within the referral pathway, right from the provision of adequate healthcare services to the effective investigations into these violations and the identification of perpetrators, the preservation of evidence, and also strengthening of the prosecution capacities, and also providing the effective remedies to support the survivors, not only from the aspect of securing convictions, but also provision of psychosocial support and any other remedies that includes reparations.
Kwa mara ya kwanza katika kazi ya kutetea haki za binadamu, wakati 2017 post election violence ilifanyika, tuliweza kujiuliza kama tume nini tunaweza kufanya zaidi ya kuandika ripoti na kutaja kwamba ukipaji wa fulani ulifanyika.
KNCHR made a deliberate effort to address the needs and concerns of the survivors. The initial care provided included the medical support to address injuries occasioned by the sexual violence and individual psychological aid to support and improve the coping mechanisms of the survivors.
Kitu ya kwanza kudina mwathiriwa, lazima mwathiriwa apate support ya kiakili. Kwa sababu gani? Healing will have to start from inside, going outward.
This was done by providing a safe and conducive environment where survivors can share their experiences freely and be listened to. This would allow them to freely express their emotions of distress, fright, guilt, shame, anger, and depression without fear of being judged.
The 38 women that came, they were in a bad state. The display of even the physical symptoms was bad. For example, like particularly one lady, actually she had the sexual trauma had made her mouth. It was my first time to experience that. It had shifted to this place. Yeah, and then she experienced, as a post-traumatic stress disorder symptom, she experienced partial blindness. She could hardly see. Much of the first session was more of letting them vent out their pain and being able to support them to know that they are not abnormal and to understand the rationale of abuse.
We supported them through trauma-focused CBT therapy. We also supported them through psychoeducation. And then in the midst of having these survivors, we noticed some of them were having behavioral disorders and addictions, so we also did a bit of addiction therapy, as well as a bit of family therapy, especially for the children.
I got support from the Sexual and Gender-Based Violence Survivors Network in Vihiga, with whom they held my hands, talked to me. I was able now to share my story freely. Yeah, so by sharing that story, I found that it was now becoming a lighter burden to me than it was before. We've been going through the counseling, not just as individuals, but also we've had focus group discussions where people have shared their experiences. Yeah, and I think this has helped us move together as a team. Yeah, and we can now be there giving support system as sisters, yeah, to one another. Yeah.
You see, right now they can stand and talk about it, yeah, and not get emotional. You know, they can recall the story and be able to talk about it. That is a big milestone.
The support was also conducted in tandem with economic empowerment as an intervention based on the recommendations in the report, Silhouettes of Brutality.
Their livelihoods had been destroyed in the process of suffering sexual violence, and therefore in efforts to restore that livelihood and rebuild the businesses that were lost during the ordeals was important. This was done through trainings and also through the provision of some form of boost through table banking initiatives, where the survivors, in collaboration with other survivors, were able to make savings and start businesses and restore the businesses that had been destroyed.
Wengi unajua walikuwa wamepoteza mali zao. Kwa hivyo kurudi ile level yenye mtu alikuwa imekuwa challenge. lakini ile akili kidogo yenye waliongezewa imewasaidia kutafuta kidogo kidogo, ndio sababu naweza ona tuko na uso zenye zinaweza ng'aa.
I've been able to see them gaining positively by establishing projects, for example, poultry farming that sustain them economically, thus reducing reliance on handouts.
Na wakati mwingine kesi ingelikuwa kotini, mtoto alikuwa anachukuliwa, akifika kotini kwa sababu ametoka lile boma lenye mnajizi alitoka, mtoto anafika kotini anasema si huyu alininajizi. Kwa nini? Wakati huyu jamaa alipelekwa akashtakia akawekwa ndani, huyu mtoto wakati alirudishwa kwa lile boma aliambiwa usiwahi enda sema fulani ndiye alikunajizi, kwa sababu utakuwa unafunga ndugu yako, baba yako, ndugu ya baba yako, mjomba yako. Ilinibidi nitafute mahali tuanze a shelter, mahali tunaweza weka wale watoto wananajiziwa, wale wanakuwa sodomized, so that our perpetrators waweze kufikishwa kotini.
The commission was able to partner with other organizations that are part of the gender sector working groups across the country to ensure that there are model policies and frameworks for the establishment of gender-based recovery centers within each and every county, and also a model safe space policy to be established so that every county can have an opportunity to create a safe space where any person who faces sexual violence can be able to access services from. For the first time in our country, there has been a case on international crimes where it is anchored on the baby Pendo case, where victims and survivors of sexual violence were part and parcel of this case, where that implicated 11 senior officers who are currently charged with international crimes in Kenya. And through that, concerns also around command responsibility featured within that case. It is an active case, and we are looking forward towards the outcome in pursuit of accountability.
Particularly when we note that the large proportion of the perpetrators, alleged perpetrators, were security officers. We note that with the increased focus on the laws, policies, and regulations, that security officers will be held individually culpable, and their bosses will be held to have command responsibility, and each one of us should be alive to the fact that an electioneering period where there are disturbances, political disturbances and otherwise, this is a period where violence, particularly sexual violence against women, is rampant. We tend to think that sexual violence is only against women, but yes, there is sexual violence against men. Unfortunately, because of our cultural nuances, men do not come out openly and say it, but we know it happens. Hospitals have noted it.
When like a mother has been violated, that impact even destroys the family. It affects the marriage relationship, it affects the children, because the other people who have not gone through the trauma, when they see the reaction of this person, they do not understand what it is. So there is always a need even to educate the rest of the community to know how they can be of help. So there is that need of creating awareness even in the community.
Nikirudi 2017, hata even 2008, 2007 2008 justice, wa mama hawajawahi pata justice, wale walidhulumiwa. Those ones were raped during that period. Hawajawahi pata justice. Na ndio still na remind Kenya National Human Rights waangalie into it. Hawa mama waliumia kama watu wale wengine wenye walipata fidia. Pia nao wangelifidhiwa maisha yao vile ilidhulumiwa.
I want you to remember that the person that you're meting violence to, particularly sexual violence, one of the most undignified acts that a person can go through is somebody's mother, just like your mother, is somebody's wife, just like your wife, somebody's sister, somebody's grandma, just like your grandmother. We condemn in the strongest terms sexual violence against anybody, whether they are in an intimate relationship or not, whether it's at the workplace, whether it is in families, and in the strongest terms, we want to condemn sexual violence against children. Laws in Kenya, we are recognized world over because of our progressive laws. For example, the Sexual Offences Act. Let's just go out and implement them.